Oh, damn. I just had like, I hate when I do that. I had a message open like on Instagram, but now X out of it. And so it looks like I read it, but like I didn't actually read it. These things. Okay, cool. There we go. We are live. Do you have it pulled up? Or?
I don't know how to find it on your YouTube. Oh, there we go.
I was going to say, I also don't know how to find it on my YouTube because I've never had to do it.
So I'm guessing I should like mute.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely mute it because it's a few seconds behind.
Yeah, it is. That's awkward. Okay.
Yeah. But it's also really funny. Yeah, we're like, how do I find it? I'm like, I don't know. Go to my YouTube page. If you subscribe, doesn't it tell you? I don't know how this works. I'm not subscribed to my page.
Yeah. It shows up at the top, like if you just refresh.
Oh, that we're live.
It's so weird because I keep looking at the one that might have people and I'm like, that's not what I'm doing right now.
I literally like scroll down so I can't see the video and I only see the comments. But sometimes when I'm like talking or doing something, it scrolls up and then I'm like, this is too confusing. I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Cool. We have a few people, 4 people watching. I guess one of them is you. I don't know if it counts me as one of them also. But hello to the people. If you're here, say hi. I always say hi to Mia. I don't know if you've heard me the past.
Oh yeah, I saw that on the last week where she can't comment. I didn't know that was a rule.
I didn't know that either. She messaged me and told me. I was like, I don't understand. Like, why can't you comment? She was like, I'm not 14, so like YouTube won't let me. And I was like, oh, that's so sad.
Hi Mia, if you're here.
Hi Rachel. Hi Mia, if you're here. Chris is here. Okay, cool. All our West Coasters.
Yeah.
If Rachel considers herself a West Coaster, but I do.
Like part of the year.
Yeah.
Right now, I think it's 6 for her, so she's not quite West Coast time anymore.
Yeah. So strange that it doesn't change for them. It makes sense, but that's strange. Okay, cool. Let's say hi. Let's jump in. We have a few folks jumping on live. I know a lot of folks hopefully joining later. People are really excited about this week. I'm really excited about this week. If this is your first time joining for the Self-Care Collaborative, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back. Thanks for joining us week after week. I can't believe we're on week 11.
Oh, that was 10, 11.
It's
wow.
Crazy, right? I say that every week, but like it continues to feel crazy. So week 11, if you're hanging in with us, if you started from the beginning and you're still here, like that's super awesome. And if you join later, that's cool too. My name's Brianna. I am the creator behind the Little Wolf Knits and the Self-Care Collaborative. And I am joined today by a friend, an amazing maker, testing queen. Is that like too much pressure if I call you the testing queen, or do you?
People have, so it's fine.
Okay. Go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell the people who you are if they don't already know you. That feels impossible, but hey, you never know.
Hi, I'm Kasey of the Scaniac, and I am a pattern tester.
That's just like your official title, though.
Yeah. It's really like all I do in the yarn world. I'm trying to do like less of that this year, but last year, I think I was always testing multiple things, and I started the blog. So I have a blog, thescaniac.com, which is all about pattern testing, tips and tricks for being a better pattern tester, interviews with other makers who are designers or testers, kind of all things pattern testing. And yeah, that's what I do in my yarn world. In my non-yarn world, I'm a lawyer / investigator. I do workplace investigations into discrimination, harassment, things like that. So by day, I investigate really complex emotional topics, and then I spend my evenings with yarn.
That makes sense. I feel like that resonates with not being an investigator, but being a therapist in a university. I feel like we probably have similar work after work transitions that we go through. So that's always funny. I love hearing about what people do. Feels like we're like superhero. Maybe that feels like extreme, but I always think like, oh, what do you do like when you're not doing this? Like what's your alter ego doing? And I don't know. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned the blog because it's so amazing. And I definitely wanted folks to hear about that if they, again, haven't heard about it yet, which feels impossible, but maybe there are people who aren't on Instagram.
I mean, yeah, I think there's several reasons why people might not know about the blog. It's very pattern testing specific, which not everybody does.
But I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm biased on this because I go through my waves of like testing. That's definitely how I entered this community. And I'll go through periods where I like testing feels like addicting. Like I'll test a pattern and then okay, I'll just do another one. Okay, just one more. And then I have like 4 tests going and I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah, I don't know what that feels like at all. What are you talking about?
But I feel like your blog is so good, not just for people who are testing patterns, but people who are learning about knitting and just like learning to read patterns and choosing patterns, knowing what to look for. And now that I'm like moving into designing, this is such a different perspective to keep in mind as I'm designing things. Even though I've been a tester, reading about it from all different makers feels like, oh, that's like so eye-opening and so important. So everyone should check out the blog, even if you're not testing patterns.
Thank you. I'm really overwhelmed with how that whole thing has gone. It just started as like such a random idea last summer, and I just didn't expect it to go where it went, and I love it. I'm always so overwhelmed. Like a lot of designers will now like tag me in their like posts about like, I'm gonna have a testing call, make sure you read this to know what I want. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I become that person? But it's really exciting. And I love like now, especially in the beginning, I was trying to get a lot of like the basics out of the way, like the do's and don'ts and like what is testing. Now that that's kind of all like in the library, so to speak, of the blog articles, a lot of what's been happening lately and what's happening early this year is like guest post and other designers and makers coming in to talk about their perspectives either on like a Friday. So the way I have it broken down is like every other Tuesday is like an interview with a maker, so maybe a tester or maybe a designer, or I think soon-ish we're going to have like a yarn dyer's perspective on testing. So I just try to get like other perspectives through like similar questions. They're not identical questions, but just similar questions on Tuesdays. And then Friday is kind of like your substantive like advice or tip post. So like every other Friday is like Stephanie wrote one that was like about tester chat etiquette, like what to do and not do in the tester chat. This Friday is going to be Janine of Capital Crochet talking about tech editing versus testing and kind of the differences and why it's important to have both. So I just love that like it's becoming a space for everyone to write, and it's not just like all about me. It's just like a little community space for everyone to talk about pattern testing.
Yeah. No, I definitely hear that. One, it's also funny because following all your blog posts, I don't think I realized there was that like pattern like you just laid out. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that makes so much sense. Like that sounds like that fits. Okay. And I really resonate with that. Obviously, starting this collaborative, I was like, oh, self-care feels important to me. And I'm talking about it with a lot of people, but like, I want it to be more than that. And so how can we get other voices involved? And so hearing, I think, a similar kind of experience to that. And I'm also curious. I mean, you're talking that the blog is relatively new. It's less than a year old, but I'm curious to hear a little bit about the rest of your journey as a maker in this community, kind of where you started, where you are now, what that has looked like for you.
Yeah. It was like kind of a whirlwind. I learned to crochet when my grandpa passed away unexpectedly in 2014 on Thanksgiving. And shortly after that, I flew out to Texas, or drove out to Texas with my family. And it was my mom's brother's wife or girlfriend. I'm not really sure. I don't know them very well. But she was like sitting there crocheting. And I was like, what are you doing? What is that? And I spent like that whole week. She taught me how to make, the basic stitches and all that. After that, I think so that was 2014. After that, until like December 2018, all I did was crochet baby blankets, and like one a year, and no pattern, just like, I'm like confusing Tunisian terms now. So just single crochet back and forth, or double crochet back and forth, or like double crochet holding 2 yarns. I was like, oh, now we're getting fancy, 2 yarns back and forth. But that's really all I did. And I did not crochet that much. Definitely didn't knit or Tunisian crochet or even think about it. And at the time I was working at a law firm and working a lot of hours. And so I really just didn't even have the time to think about whether I wanted to do that more, or really know that that's what I would do once I quit. So then I ended up getting a new job in August of 2018. And it was like shortly after that I was like, oh, I'm done at 4 p.m. every day. And I just filled my evenings with crocheting. And then I taught myself to knit in like December of 2018. And then I started my Instagram, I think in March, maybe February of 2019. And it was really just going to be, sorry, it was like a Instagram accidental video chat test group. It always happens in every test group. Someone accidentally video chats. I was like, who's calling me? So I started the yarn Instagram because I felt annoying on my personal Instagram. And I was like, I'm pretty sure these like friends from college don't want to see like a baby blanket and then a scarf and then another baby blanket and then a stuffed animal, and just like over and over and over again. But for some reason I felt the need to post it. So I started the yarn Instagram. And then I don't even know what happened, but just in following people, I learned what testing is. And then I started testing. And then, like you said earlier, it can get very addicting. And I have that kind of personality to like dive all into things. And so I dove all into that. And I'm really like, I'm very deadline driven. And so the nice thing about pattern testing is like, there's a deadline on it. And so I get it done. And without that, I struggled to finish anything or even start anything. So I think that's why I liked it. Is one, you like immediately meet a whole community of other people, right? You get thrown into this test group chat, and it's a bunch of other makers of varying levels of skill, and they live all over the place, not even just the country, like all over the world sometimes. And they all have a common interest, which I don't know anybody in my personal life who knits or crochets. So it's really just been nice to meet other people who have the same hobbies. And then the deadlines just like help me make sure I make things.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some structure and like connection that comes out of testing that I definitely like, that resonates with me. I know when I'm feeling, especially when I'm feeling like unmotivated or uninspired, that I'm like, I don't know what to cast on. I think that happened lately, that I'm like, oh, I have all these sweater quantities. I know what colorways I want to use, but I just don't know what. And I'll turn to like, oh, a test. Like, let me do that. Let me jump in, and that'll give me some motivation to get things done. But it's also really cool. I mean, hearing, obviously, I think I must have found you from Chelsea not that long. I think it was in 2019. Maybe it was, I think it was 2019. But I obviously don't know a lot about how you started making. I knew you had crocheted first, but it's always interesting to hear. It feels like making comes into people's lives at like these really opportune moments. That's like, it's often not something we seek out or like, oh, I want to learn a new hobby. Let me learn how to knit, or let me learn how to crochet, but some form of like connection, someone we know, it's a really hard time in our lives. Something happens that like connects us to it. And so it's always cool, I think, to hear how other people have kind of gotten hooked in and where that came from.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know anything about knitting or crocheting. Like there was no one in my life that had done that. It was just like my long lost uncle had this wife or girlfriend who was sitting with yarn. And I was like, that sounds like something I might want to do. And, but it wasn't even until 4 years later that it like clicked and it like fell into my life when it needed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. And I'm also kind of curious too. I imagine it might kind of move alongside that journey you just talked about, but hearing the job transitions, going from working, I imagine a lot of hours to now working less, but having a still pretty taxing job. How does self-care kind of map onto that journey for you? What has that looked like? Maybe where did it start, or what was your like idea about what self-care is and like why it matters?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason I left my other job was because I decided it was time to prioritize self-care. I didn't know that like knitting was going to be the way I did that, but it was just a very stressful job. I was literally like vomiting in the morning from the stress of not wanting to go and the anxiety that it caused. And I went into that job mostly because I had a lot of loans and they pay well. And I paid off my loans. And then I was like, okay, now it's time to find something else that's going to be more sustainable. And so I think just even the act of like looking for another job, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to work that much. So I just like the act of looking for another job and taking another job and like taking a major pay cut and knowing that that was okay because it was going to pay off in terms of my mental health. I think that was kind of the step one in self-care for me. I was just like, I have to like this, I can't do this. I can't wake up and be this miserable. I can't work until 8 or 9 p.m. and then go home and go to bed and immediately wake up and do it again every single day. Like that just doesn't work for me. And so finding a job where when I was interviewing and looking for stuff, like having set work hours was important to me. And I like, even if I ended up finding a great job because I care about the work that I do and there's set work hours. And I feel like that's really hard to come by. But when I was looking, I was more focused on like, even if I'm like I don't really care that much about what I do, it's just another lawyer job or whatever it's going to be. I just need it to be like a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 4 or something so that I know that I can reset in the evenings and have that time to unwind. And I think that's where knitting came in later. It was like how I reset every evening. It was just like, okay, work is done, pick up the yarn, sit with your thoughts, just like kind of come back down from the day. And so I think that's how it kind of fit in. I didn't really like think about it all that much, especially in with how the knitting came into the picture. Like that just fell into the picture. But I think for me, the important thing is like having set work hours and like not feeling bad about not going beyond that. I think I see with a lot of colleagues and friends, and even in the knitting community, like designers and makers just will push beyond like their work hours, right? Like they're just like, well, yeah, but if I just stay up, I can get this one more thing done, or I can just like, I'm so close, let me just stay up till 2 a.m. and get it done. And I'm like, no, you have to like work and then relax. And I was such a workaholic my whole life. I mean, I was a total nerd. I thought my grades starting in 5th grade mattered for getting into law school. So I was like stressed out and overworked and a workaholic my entire life. And I honestly think it wasn't until I left that last job where that shifted for me. And I was just like, why? Like, why am I working so hard? To what end? What is this doing for me? What is the purpose? And I just decided that wasn't that important to me anymore.
Yeah. It sounds like there was just a shift for you in terms of like what mattered. And it makes sense. Like loans are loans and like they need to get paid. And so it sounds like that took priority for a little bit. But then once that stressor was kind of off your plate, realizing like, okay, now that that's done, I need to like prioritize myself and what actually matters and figure out maybe what some of my values are. And it sounds like having that time to attend to yourself was there and you had the opportunity to take advantage of it that maybe you hadn't had before. And it almost sounds, I mean, Kasey, the way you're talking about it sounds like it was, I don't want to say an easy thing, but just like something that was logical. Like, yes, my job, I was very overworked. I was not liking it. And so I just looked for a new job and that was taking care of myself. But like, what an easy process for you to go through?
I think it was easier than I expected it to be. I think once I decided I am going to find a different work-life balance, I just was determined to do it. And I'm trying to think back on like how quickly it happened. It did take like, I want to say like 6 months or so between when I was like, I need to find something else and when the right opportunity fell in my lap. And it's so hard. I mean, I'm sure several other industries are like this, but the legal community really is all about like connections and like getting another job in the legal community, if it's not like out of like law school interviews, is just so much about like who you know and who is where and did you keep those connections. And I hate that. But I did luckily have a friend from the same law firm leave and go to this new place that I'm at. And then I was able to like, I found it through LinkedIn, but then he was there. So he put in a good word and blah, blah, blah. So it was easy. Like once I had the offer, I just was like, well, duh, I'm doing it. Like I didn't even think twice about it. It was an easy transition for me in that sense where I was just like, I am ready for a different lifestyle. But it's so weird for me to think about because I had wanted to be a lawyer since literally 5th grade. So it was weird to like work so hard to just end up at a point where I was just trying to pay off my loan so I could stop being a lawyer. And I think that part's always been a little hard for me to like grapple with. Like, why did I just spend my whole life stressing about this end goal just to reach the end goal and be like, okay, good, I did it. Now I'm done. Which kind of like, I've been thinking about like kind of fits in with my whole like homework thing. Like I'm kind of the same way with knitting. I'm very process driven and like the end result is just kind of like, okay, now what? What's next? What's next? And I feel like that kind of relates in a sense.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, great, cool. We met a deadline. We did the work. Now what's next? What's next? So.
Yeah. Which is interesting. Also, Kate just joined us and she said she missed so much. You're here now. That's all that matters. But yeah, it's interesting because I was talking to someone earlier in the week, and obviously we're having a lot of conversations about anti-racism and about social injustice and what happened last week, 2 weeks ago now at this point. And they were saying how self-care is a radical act. And I was kind of like, oh yeah, haha, like, okay. And then really thought about it, but like self-care is a radical act. And sometimes it sounds scary or like sounds like it's going to be really daunting. And part of me is like, oh, is that intentional? Is that like what we're told that like, oh, getting a new job that, you know, allows you to take care of yourself is going to be really hard and really scary. Don't do it. And then it's cool to hear your experience of like, oh, actually, once I decided to do it, it was easier than I thought. Like it wasn't so bad. It sounds like the decision, once you got to that point, you were like ready then to just I was already kind of going down the hill.
I think a lot of times, especially in certain fields, people get so hung up on like trying to like one up their resume, right? Like you feel like you have to keep timing and that can be difficult. So I feel like a lot of people get stuck in a certain job because they don't want to go back to the bottom somewhere else, or they can't find something that's equal, or they can't find something that's higher. And I just And I feel like people also always think of careers as like, you have to get somewhere so that like you can grow your career, and not really taking the time to realize that most people who are successful, their resume is like all over the place. Like they've done a million different things, right? So I think for me, what made it a little easier was just reminding myself, like, what I do next doesn't have to be what I do. Like I can do it for 2 years and then find something else if I don't like it. Or I can just do it for 1 year and find something else. Or I can stay and grow there if I love it. But like, it just has to be the next step. It doesn't have to be the last step.
Yeah. And that feels tied to what you're saying too, about like the process of it. And I think how it relates to making, right? That like, it's such a different experience when you do it for the sake of the product. And like, I've definitely done that. There are things that I really, really want the product, but I still think it does something different when you're really present in the process of it. And I hear that in what you're saying, that like working so hard to get to this end goal, but not living, like not being present in your life between that, is it really worth it?
Yeah.
That end goal, because guess what? When you get there, that bar is going to move, and you're just going to keep shooting and aiming for that. And I don't know, that feels like sad to be missing out on life in that way, or like to be missing out on your craft or your making. If you're always just like, oh, I want to finish this, I want to finish this, and not getting to sit and kind of enjoy the growth and the process there that happens. Also, Rachel said, I don't know if you have YouTube up.
I do.
Rachel said testing queen is definitely a resume booster. I assume on your resume, Kasey, I don't know. I know some people like to keep their alter egos separate, like we were talking about earlier. But it is funny, now we're going through the process of interviewing interns for next year. So every year we have like new intern applicants. And I always enjoy, and it might just be me because I know I have my alter ego sitting at the back of my mind, when people like have something on their resume that's just like a little breadcrumb into something, like they were in an a cappella group or they did this. And I just like, my colleagues laugh. They're like, Brie, you like zone in on that. As soon as we get the opportunity to ask anything about the person, I'm like, so you were in an a cappella group? Like, tell me about what name, what part did you sing? Like, and I think they're always like, oh,
yeah.
Okay, how cool that like you can take that into my world. So I think that should be on your resume.
For sure. I mean, when I applied for the job that I have now, I was not even like crocheting regularly, let alone pattern testing or knitting or anything like that. And I remember that section of the resume, like I just deleted it because I was like, I have nothing interesting to say. Like all I do is binge watch TV and like hang out with my dog. So like, I'm going to delete the like hobbies section so no one can ask me about this. But now I'm definitely like adding yarn in there somehow.
Yeah. Rachel says resume booster. Kasey said Cinefan girl. That should also be on your resume, which like makes a lot of sense. And then Chris was saying, I feel this. I feel like most people are probably resonating with this right now. Whenever I'm asked what my 5-year plan is, I say it's to be happy. When I stop being happy, I'll go do something else. And that feels so on par with, I think, what we're talking about.
I feel that way a lot. Like when people talk about, you know, I'm doing this so that I can retire early or so that I can this and this and this. And I'm like, but you're miserable now. And like, I'm 32. I don't want to be miserable in my 30s. I'd rather be miserable in my 50s. Ideally, I'll be miserable never. And that's probably what you can do if you focus on now. But like, if you agree to be miserable now, you're absolutely going to at least be miserable now. And you might also be miserable later. So
yeah. I remember maybe at the beginning of my doctorate program, it might've been an undergrad, I used to say to people, but like, what if you die before you get there? And like, that was the worst thing ever, that you could go through life and then die before you get to live out your thing. And now I'm like, what if you don't die and you just lived miserably for so many years? Like that feels like the worst thing ever.
Exactly. Like all you know for sure is that you're alive right now. So just try to be happy now, make ends meet, do what you need to do to like get through the day.
Yeah. I'm also kind of curious too, because you're talking about from a really young age, you were so driven to be a lawyer, and that takes a lot of motivation, a lot of dedication. I imagine a lot of delaying gratification for like rewards and being like, okay, I'm not going to do this now because I'm going to study or I'm going to focus on this, but it'll be worth it in the end goal. Do you have thoughts on like where that came from for you, or like where you learned that?
It's weird. My parents are not like me at all. I have no idea what came from. There was zero pressure at home to get good grades. Like my brother was not like me at all. I don't know. I do have OCD, so I think that's part of it, wanting to be like a perfectionist. And I think that like the grades thing was something that was in my control, and I was able to, you know, I knew I could do these things and get these grades and make these teachers happy and blah, 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 blah. I think that's kind of where the like school side aspect of it came from. But honestly, like in terms of like nurture, I have no idea like why I was like a stressed out basket case of a child. But I do, like you were talking about like delaying gratification and all that. Like when I think back on like high school and college and even law school, I don't feel like I was not doing other things. Like I love school. And right now I wish I could, like the only thing I want to do, I often say like I wish I could be a professional student, because that is like where I thrive. I love homework, I love assignments, I love school. So I never really, even though I was stressed and determined to get good grades forever, I never hated it. Because I just like loved being assigned a specific thing to do and like working out math problems and all of it. I just loved homework. So weird. So I don't, what? I was just gonna say, so I don't feel like I necessarily like delayed gratification on the process, but I definitely quickly recognized that there was not joy in the end result.
That makes sense. And also, I'm not surprised to hear you lay out what that process looked like, because I'm like, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense too. Even with your place in the yarn community, like I like having testing. I like doing, you know, having deadlines. It's like a little assignment that I get to then check off that I did and get it, not get a grade on, but then I'm, you know, there's like some positive reward. I did it. It's good. And so that makes sense that that is not something new for you. That's just a part of your personhood, and there was enjoyment along the process. It sounds like you also, though, have really good awareness to recognize that, okay, this isn't cutting it anymore, or like this isn't as fulfilling as it could be or should be for me. And so it's time to kind of move on.
Yeah. But yeah, with the pattern testing, it's, I mean, the second that I told myself like fewer tests, I was like, I'm going to make Joe a sweater. And it took all but 2 seconds for me to put together a make along with deadlines, because I was like, this is never going to get done unless I put deadlines on it. So
yeah, that's funny. And it makes like, of course. Curious too. So we're talking a lot about being done with work at 4 and then kind of having the evenings to unwind and make. And you mentioned your husband, you mentioned your pets. What does self-care look like for you right now? Is it solely making? Do you have other things that you do to kind of recharge and unwind and take care of yourself?
Lately it is mostly just knitting, because we are home. I'm in Los Angeles, so we definitely are not allowed to leave. It is not going well here, as you can see on the news. So it's been a lot of making, and my husband actually works at the firm that I left. So he works a lot of hours. So it is a lot of like audiobooks and TV and knitting and hanging out with the animals. I have my dog and 2 cats. But this, gosh, I want to say just last week, so it's just new. I've tried to go on walks in the morning before I start work, because I realized late last year in LA, our commutes, even if they're short in distance, are long in time. And although I hated commuting, it was my time to listen to my podcast. And I was like the most loyal Armchair Expert podcast fan. I listened to every single episode when it came out. Like that was just what I did on my drives in the morning and after work. And then the pandemic with the working from home, I must be 40 episodes behind. Like I just never make time to listen to podcasts. And for some reason, like it's not something I enjoy listening to while knitting, crocheting. I can do audiobooks and I can do like Netflix and music, but for some reason, like I've associated podcasts with like moving. So I've tried to like implement going on walks in the morning before I sit down to work and just listening to my podcast and my commute walk.
Yeah.
And that's been nice. I missed having that like intellectual stimulation in the morning. And it's just nice to not immediately like with working from home, you often just like wake up and just start working. And even though it felt like I just woke up and went to work and started working, having that like hour to 45 minutes of even just getting ready and driving was a gap between waking up and working that I don't have now.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I was so much more miserable just rolling out of bed and starting to work right away. It's like you don't even get to wake up. So I'm trying to implement walks as self-care in the morning, my morning self-care pre-work. After work, it really is just, I mean, I Peloton. So sometimes I will do a Peloton ride right after work and then I'll start knitting or crocheting, but it really is a lot of knitting and crocheting until I go to bed.
I love that. So like I talked about this a little bit last week with Darian, and it feels like part of the walk is like being outside, being in nature just does something for us. So like, that's cool. But I think you bring up a really good point that I've talked about with some of my colleagues. I've always had a really short commute to work. I mean, 5-10 minutes. So it's been easier for me to adjust and say, okay, 5-10 minutes, make my coffee, something else, and then jump into work. But I know a lot of my colleagues have a longer commute, 45 an hour, like you were saying. And they were like, I really, really miss that time. And waking up early, like, doesn't cut it. At the time, like out of my house, away from my partner, out of my space to listen to my podcast, listen to my book, whatever I'm doing. And this, I've heard the same for like the commute home, that it's really hard for folks. I mean, when you do a job that's taxing, especially if it's like emotionally, mentally taxing, I think having time to like unwind and decompress before you interact with other people is like,
like the time to not talk. Sometimes like my job is just like so many interviews all day with people who are very emotional for understandable reasons. And then I'm very like empathetic. So I like take a lot of it on, and I just need like that hour to just like super closed mouth. Like I'm not uttering any sounds for the next hour.
Yeah. And I don't want to hear anything. Sometimes like being home with Michael, and Michael's home most of the time, and like I love him, but I'm like, go play video games for like half an hour, please. I love you. I'll talk to you after you're done. I just don't want to hear anyone for like a little bit of time. And so that's cool too. I think hearing like more of the Peloton, the spin, I imagine there's part of that to it. And obviously, I mean, it feels so basic to be like, yes, taking care of yourself, sleeping, eating, being physical, but like sleeping, eating, being physical. So doing something like that, especially when we're spending so much time inside, in play, spending so much time inside in the same space, it's like really taxing on our brains. So I imagine that's helpful too.
Yeah.
And also now like realizing as I'm talking, I imagine the walk and like the cycling adds some structure to your day, like going along with that theme of like, I like having structure and deadlines, and like, okay, in the morning I go for my walk and that's what I do. And then I come to work and then I do my workout and then I kind of chill out and knit or whatever that is. And so it sounds like you've gotten really good at implementing your own structure, even when there isn't any, like your make along. Like there wasn't structure. I know that's how I work best. I'll just make it and create it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm very motivated by like schedules and rules. I'm a rule follower. I like rules.
So that makes me curious then too. Are there challenges that you find that like get in the way of you following your routine or like doing whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, especially during the past year and a half of like the shitstorm that has been,
Like, gosh, I feel like the whole pandemic made it easier to prioritize the self-care and my like personal routine because there's just no conflicting things. Like I would love to see my friends, but not being able to see them really makes sure I have time to exercise or knit. I should probably knit less, but I really need to. That's all I do. I think the biggest hurdle for me, and like I said, the walks are kind of a new thing I'm trying out. I have a tendency to want like work to be done so that I can get on with my day. And so like the hurdle for me most days is really allowing myself to not start working right away. Like, I tend to get up by 6:30-ish and like I'm always like, oh my gosh, if I just started working right now, I could be done by 3. And then I'm like, and then I'd have the whole day left. But then I find when I do that too often, I'm just like miserable throughout the whole day because I haven't done the self-care in the morning. So yeah, I'm trying to.
Yeah, that sounds like a mini iteration of that. Like, I know my tendency is just to work really, really hard to get to the end goal. And like sometimes it's not enjoyable along the way. And so it sounds like you experience that in a, like the grand scheme of things with your career, but also a daily kind of process for you to be like, okay, don't be rushing through things to get to the end because we know where that gets you. And that's kind of enjoyable.
Yeah, that's very true.
So then I guess the big question is, and I know we chatted about this a little bit before, kind of hearing some of the things that have worked for you and some of the things that you've really had to implement. Like they're not always there. You've had to put in a lot of structure and listen to some of the things that you've become aware of when you have that insight to what's going on for you. I'm dying to know if you're having thoughts on homework or suggestions for folks to try.
Oh man, I was like really struggling to come up with something. So, and I think my struggle is also like so many of the people that have already come on here have had such great homework assignments. So I'm like, I don't want to say go on a walk because that's kind of what Darian said. And I don't want to set boundaries because that's what Rachel said. But I'm wondering if there's a way to, and it's going to look different for everybody, but I'm wondering if there's a way to encourage people to set work hours and like not work beyond that. So, and I know that's easier for people that have a physical, like go to it career. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's what I do anyways. But, especially for a lot of people in the maker community who have like side gigs, I kind of want to see if there's like, at the beginning of your week, set like the number of hours you're going to work each day and don't do work beyond that. Like pick up a selfish project, do something else that's not work outside of those hours. But I don't know because that one doesn't apply to everyone. So
what?
So maybe like a combo of that plus like do your self-care in the morning.
But I do imagine I guess I'm trying to think, and maybe I'm thinking too broadly, that like, I don't know. I guess I'm coming from a framework of like, everyone has work that they're doing, whether it's like an official job that they have a contract for, or they've signed, or they're taking care of like a house and a family, or they're working on themselves. Like, I, I don't know, that all feels like work to me. And so figuring out, I think for you, some of the suggestions that you're sharing is that you've really figured out what works for you. Like, this is what my schedule looks like. I could sleep in and then just jump right into work and then stay up later, but like that doesn't sound like it works for you. Waking up at 6:30 sounds like the worst thing in the world for me, but like I'm like, oh, that would be so nice to have a little bit of time before work. So I think there's something to figuring out based on your schedule and whatever your work looks like, what those work hours look like and what that means. And it might look different for everyone, like you said. Some people might be working two jobs, some people might have it more informal work or taking care of a house. Maybe you're working 50 hours a week, maybe you're working 30 hours a week, but figuring out what your work hours look like and really trying to set some structure.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe it can be like try to map out for a few days or for a week, like a structured schedule for like what your days are going to look like, and try to stick to that and see if it makes you feel any sort of way.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I mean, it's also like the beginning of the year. I know I'm not a person that's like super set on like New Year's resolutions, but I imagine now is as good of a time as any. People are getting into new routines and setting new goals. And so why not figure out and look what that structure looks like, or try and figure out what that structure looks like for you. And if you're not hitting, like, I think the cool thing here is going to be if you're not sticking to it, that reflection on, okay, so what's getting in the way of that?
Yeah.
And then maybe it's just not working the way you have it set up, and maybe something needs to be tweaked or changed a little bit.
Yeah. So maybe not, it's not like necessarily sticking to your structure and beating yourself up if you don't, but like reflecting on like what does structure look like for you and your work?
Mm-hmm. I love this. And I'm so excited for all like the moms and dads and parents and caregivers who are watching this that are going to be like, yes, Bree and Kasey, that was a wonderful idea. I just told my kid that it was outside of my work hours and they should come back to me in the morning. Like, part of me thinks every caregiver is literally going to hate me when I say this. Part of me thinks that that's a really good lesson then for also kids to learn. Obviously not like
it's mom's office hours right now.
Yeah. It's like, okay, if you're a kid like can cook for themselves, like I'm talking about them. I'm not talking about like little kiddos who literally starve. But like also I know it would be helpful to have other folks in your life and your family recognize that you have a plan and you have a schedule. And I know my mom was big on this. Like, she was a stay-at-home mom most of my life, and she was like always doing shit. She was like so busy. I don't know how she did as much as she did, but it was like, yeah, I don't have time to do that today. Like, next time, plan better. I'll help you in the morning. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, I learned to plan better because next time I asked her earlier in the day or like whatever I needed to do. So I think it'll be cool to see what happens when you're part of a system, even if it's just you and your pets or you and whoever. Other folks are going to notice the change, and it'll be cool to see how they respect that or don't respect that, or what that, how you kind of navigate that as a system instead of just an individual person. Because I think you also talked a lot about like connection and support being important for you. So I think that'll be an interesting part to see from folks too, how others respond to their structure.
Yeah. I think for me, what I'll try to do is put structure into my evenings, because a lot of times I just like, I'm like, well, work's done. And I just like look at my phone for 2.5 hours and then like crochet a round or two and then I'm rewatching The Hills. I'll turn on The Hills. And I feel like sometimes my evenings get away from me because I just don't have a purpose or a goal for the day. So I try to put structure into my like after work time, because my work time already has that structure.
I like that. I know I get into that sometimes. And as much as I'm like, yes, I want to wake up early and like do something, then I'm like, oh, that just doesn't feel realistic. It feels like I'm setting myself up for failure. And I also get into, I mean, it feels different, but I get into like, I need to cook, I need to do laundry, I need to dye yarn or do whatever I need to do. And then I like want to get it all done. So then I could just like sit on the couch and do nothing for 4 hours or five, however long the rest of the night is, until I'm like, wow, I'm really tired. I need to go to bed. But I like that idea of what could structure look like, especially because I think I'm balancing a lot of now like designing and having testers and writing new patterns that a lot of times I'm like chilling, knitting, and then like, oh, it's 11 o'clock. Someone wrote something in the tester group. Let me like do a bunch of math and figure it out. And so I think I'm going to focus on setting, it sounds scary, like setting more work hours.
I think it's going to be the hardest for some people in the yarn community that do these, like, either do this full time, designing full time, or do it after their other jobs or in addition to parenting, because I feel like what I see happening a lot is all of that other work, it is still a lot of work, is filling every single gap of your life. And like, you want to respond to the tester right away. And you think like, okay, I'm done with my day job, or I just fed the kids, so let me just go work on this pattern. And then you never get to unwind, because even though it feels like your fun side gig or you're so grateful that you get to design for a living, like it's still work and it's still exhausting. And like, if you don't set it aside, then you're just working nonstop. And I think with those kinds of jobs, it's easier to forget that it's still a job. Like if I was doing my job as much as I see some of the people in the yarn community doing their job, everyone would be like, you have to stop working. So I just want like this community especially to like do that for themselves. Even for testing, like I'm constantly working on tests and like trying to meet deadlines and all that too. So I need to work on that too, which was part of like one of my goals for the year, is to do a non-test for every test. Because I'm like, I need to just like make without worrying about editing and yardage and like making sure gauge is like exactly on throughout the whole entire sweater. So it's hard. It's going to be hard, but
it is. But it sounds like a good challenge. I mean, even in that like example that you shared, that's an example of like setting structure. Structure doesn't have to just be, I guess I'm making this assumption, and you let me know if you feel differently, Kasey, that like structure doesn't have to be, okay, from this hour to this hour, I'm doing this, from this hour to this hour, I'm doing that. But I think there's other more like long-term structure that you could put in place. Like for everything I work on for myself, I'm going to do for someone else, or every test, I'm going to do a selfish thing. And so maybe even it's, okay, every hour that I spend on designing, I'm going to spend 2 hours on 2 hours. That's like probably not, maybe an hour on like just selfish knitting or knitting. That's something like when I sit on the couch with Michael and watch TV, I'm not like working and not really paying attention to what's going on. I can be a little bit more present and just like knit on a sock or something that's for me. And so I like that idea of like structure can look different. There's not one picture of this is what structure looks like. You have to have a planner and like figure out every hour of your day and what that's going to be.
Yeah, I like that too. And yeah, I mean, figuring out every hour of your day is just a recipe for failure, because things happen and your whole day gets thrown. So I think thinking a little more bigger picture is probably better too. And yeah. even if it's just like setting aside one day of the week where you're just not gonna do the designer stuff or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I love too. I think I hear it so strongly, and I'm sure other people hear it, that like through all that you're saying, there's this spirit of like self-compassion, and like it's cool to have goals. It's cool to try to do something differently. And if you don't do it perfectly, that doesn't mean you should like beat yourself up or like chastise yourself. You can hold a little bit of compassion and grace, and maybe even like, I always encourage folks when it feels like there's that critical voice to like, it's cool, that can be there, that's fine, you're not gonna ignore it and it's not gonna go away. But like, can you also invite curiosity in to just be like, oh, I wonder what went wrong here, like I wonder what didn't work, I wonder what I could do differently next time. And like sometimes that's most times I would say having that curiosity and compassion is way more helpful than having that like, oh, I beat myself up because I didn't stick to the schedule, or like I didn't do exactly what I wanted to do. And I hear a lot of that in kind of what you're sharing too.
Yeah. Any other fails by yarn.
Yeah.
That is another kind of self-care.
I mean, as a yarn dyer, I feel like a little biased in it, like endorsing that, but like, yeah. All else fails by yarn.
By Bree's yarn.
Buy my yarn. You can buy anyone's yarn, really. I just feel happy when
I shouldn't be buying yarn. But.
Yeah. That doesn't even have to be. I think if I ever talk to anyone outside of the knitting community as like a business owner, and they'd be like, why are you celebrating when other people who are like competing in your market are selling people yarn? And it's like, because people are getting yarn. Yeah. That matters. I don't care.
It's amazing.
I just want people to have yarn.
Yeah.
Cool. Kasey, it's been so cool. I'm super excited to see what folks share with us this week. If you try, I mean, feel free. So if you're watching along these videos, if this isn't your first one, you've probably heard me say this before. But obviously, I think these videos are amazing in and of themselves, but there's also a more interactive part of the videos where the makers give some sort of homework assignment or challenge to y'all every single week. And it doesn't have to be specific to that week. If you're catching up and like watching a video later, that's fine. And if you post about that on Instagram and you use the hashtag Self-Care Collaborative 2020, you're entered into win prizes through, I think, the end of March right now is where we're going to, and then I'm going to cap it. And so I still need to choose the winner for the end of December. So if you didn't get your post in yet, get it in. I was going to say maybe I'll do it tonight, but I'm going to take Kasey's advice and not do it tonight, but maybe I'll do it tomorrow, which just gives y'all more time to get your posts in. And it doesn't just need to be one post per challenge. Like if y'all want to post what your plan is or what you're thinking your structure is going to look like and tag myself, tag Kasey, and then you're going through your week and like life happens and it's either working or not working and you want to post about it and update us, like post again and tag us and maybe let us know at the end of the week or the end of the time that you've set what went well, what didn't go well, what you might change moving forward. I know that's always the most exciting. I mean,
yeah,
everything's the most exciting part, chatting with everyone, but I also really love seeing people not only say like, oh, I love that video or it was so great, but actually making changes in their lives and rethinking and reflecting on how they're doing things is like, I don't know, so cool to me. So definitely if you're watching, use the hashtag, enter your post. There's some really cool prizes and giveaways that are coming soon. Chris said, if all else fails, buy yarn.
Yes.
Detroit said, yes, Chris is a champion yarn buyer. We should make t-shirts.
Yeah.
That are like, if all else fails, buy yarn. And it should have the Skaniac on. Like, I think we should make that happen. Let's like chat about that. Kasey.
It is my logo now. So yes.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Any other final words, Kasey, before we kind of sign off?
I don't think so. Just like everyone needs to stop working and start knitting and buying yarn, and the world will be better.
That sounds like a good plan to me. I'll let my boss know tomorrow. We'll see.
Although I need designers to keep knitting or keep working so that I can keep testing. But
yeah, that makes sense. That understood. Awesome. Thank you, Kasey, so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you and hear a little bit about your life and what your journey through this community, through self-care has looked like. It's been super fun. I'm super appreciative, and I'm very, very excited to hear and see what structure looks like for folks over the next week or so and how it works out for people. I'm curious to see. Michael might be able to hear me, but how Michael reacts to some of the structure I put into place around here. I'll keep you all posted on that. Yes. And thank you, everybody, obviously, for coming and watching. If you were here live, it was so great to have you. If you're watching later, thanks for coming in and checking out the videos after the fact. And I will see everyone next week with a super awesome maker who, it feels like for the first time in 11 weeks, is not yet, I'll say, because
I want to know who it is.
It's not yet a personal friend. So that's going to be really exciting.
I'm so curious now.
Yeah. I mean, you could look if you wanted to, but it's going to be really good. Lots of crochet goodness, I think.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
All right. Everybody, I'm signing off. Kasey, go get to knitting and making and doing whatever you need to do this evening. Yeah. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time. Bye.